Welcome to Confessions of a Youth Worker, the podcast that lifts the lid on the inspiring, challenging and often untold stories from the world of youth and community work. I'm Sabrina Dennis, CEO of First Class Foundation, and from where I've sat over the last few years, I've seen the incidents of knife crime, gun crime and more tragedy and loss than I could have ever imagined. Over the last 2 years, youth violence has increased by 13% and drug-related offences by 52%, making youth violence a core priority for local police. In each episode, I'll be diving into the heart of the work that is shaping the future of our communities and the lives of young people everywhere. This is Confessions of a Youth Worker. Welcome to episode 4 of Confessions of a Youth Worker podcast. I am joined today by some more phenomenal guests working in and across Birmingham and the wider West Midlands. So let's get into it. On my left, I'm joined by Claire Graham. She's currently employed as the Head of Service for Contextual Safeguarding, working within Empower You, Exploitation and Missing Hub at Birmingham Children's Trust. She has worked within the field of social work with both vulnerable adults, children and families for the past 21 years. That's a lie because you're like 21.
Oh, you're so good.
But honestly, it's 21 years, phenomenal. I'm also joined by Matthew Stone. We call him Matt though, but Matthew Stone, he's a delivery team manager for Birmingham and Solihull at the Violence Reduction Partnership, the VRP. Matt is a youth leader, mentor, public speaker and trainer, and has over 10 years working with youth organisations in the UK and overseas. Welcome, Matt.
It's a very good bio, thank you.
Oh, what's yours? And I'm also joined by none other than Dr. Mr. Craig Pinkney, criminologist, urban youth specialist and lecturer at the University College Birmingham, an experienced youth worker. Craig holds a BA Honours in Youth and Community Development and a postgraduate certificate in Teaching and Learning, postgraduate certificate in Research and a Master's in Criminology. I've got some fire around the table this evening and I'm really excited to talk more about safeguarding our young people and the community in the context of youth violence. So let's get into it. It's a question that I've asked every single guest while they've come on the show, and is, what is a youth worker? And there's no order to answer, so whoever wants to go first can. But what's a youth worker?
I can go first.
Go on then.
As a youth worker myself and someone that teaches youth work, youth work is an encompassing term that talks ultimately about individuals that attain a particular knowledge and skill set, and they utilize a series of tools to work with children and young people that will enable them to be the best human beings that we want for their future. Mm-hmm. And I guess all of those tools can be anything from education, from arts, from dance, from music, to mechanics, to hair and beauty, and the list goes on. But it's about personal and self-development. Ultimately, it's about that and getting young people to be critical thinking. And it's also about them being activists and fighting for what's right and what's the truth. And I think that the essence of youth work has disappeared. And I think we'll probably talk about why that has happened if we have time. But that's how I kind of view what youth work is and what it should be. But my concluding point would be that there was a standard around youth work and there isn't a standard anymore. So I think that when we have these conversations now, a lot of people that claim to be youth workers haven't gone through a process that would have tested what type of youth worker you are. Yeah. So when we talk about some of the issues around violence in our communities, that's probably the reason why we're not having the impact in which we would like to see.
That's standard. I want to. We're going to go into that in a little bit, but yes, thank you, Craig. Matt, coming to you.
Yeah, so I would say, I work with a lot of youth workers. I think I have conversations with them, and I think I learn a lot from them around just that youth work is a lifestyle. That it isn't just something that they kind of switch on and switch off. It's something that comes out in their language, comes out in their nature, comes out in what they do. I think for me, you have to really love young people, and you have to love them for who they are, what they bring, whether good, bad, ugly. You have to listen and listen to understand, not necessarily listen to try to advise and shape who they are, because you know, we all are born, we all have different things that happen in our childhood, which ultimately lead to who we are going to be when we're older. So I think a youth work is there to guide.
Yeah. Fab. Claire, to you.
Yeah, so I suppose, you know, I'm a qualified social worker with a youth work in mind and concept. So for me, it comes from my lived experience and expecting a youth worker to be a person that connects with young people, that understands young people, that can build relationships that are trusting, to enable safety, but to also enable innovativeness, creativity, making them a positive contribution to society and walking alongside them no matter what the journey, always being there and being that safe space, that safe person that they can go to. So I haven't got like the academic description of what a youth worker is and should be. And Craig, I think, has just summed it up really nicely, what the expectations of a youth worker should be. But for me, it's about what I would have expected as a child.
Right. So going into like your expectations and the standard, because I think they're two very different things, aren't they? The standard is one thing and your expectations of a youth worker is another thing. If you can reflect back on your experiences of having a youth worker in your life, share that with us, and then we can maybe dig a little bit deeper and think about how that plays out today.
So I wish I had one.
Right, okay.
So I want to be that one for those children that need one, because it's something that I didn't have. But I know other people who have had them, who are shining now, whose career path has taken a different pathway, who have developed into mature adults, still carrying a bit of trauma, still carrying a bit of emotional grief, but because of that one youth worker. And it doesn't have to be a youth worker, it can be just the one, that one person that just sees something in you, helps build confidence, self-esteem, walks beside you, even in the troubled times, is there for you, is that person at the end of the phone. If you call them, they're there responding. That's what I wish I had. Right. So that's what I try to be.
Yeah. Love that. Matt, Craig, you guys are nodding in agreement.
Yeah, so so like, again, I didn't have a youth worker, but I had a lot of youth leaders. You know, growing up in the church, you know, you have like certain groups, and then you kind of have maybe like you have like a youth leader, then you might have like a core leadership. And so kind of I was always kind of seen as someone who could progress and become a leader one day. So I had like mentors, support, leadership support. But I think just adding on to what Claire said, the only thing I would add is that they were consistent. I think consistency is important.
Absolutely.
And, you know, like kind of showing up, even if you yourself may have not been having the best week or the best day, you sometimes have to put that to a side to make sure that you're there consistently for that person. So I think that really helped me in terms of my trust of that person. So like in that context, but also family and friends as well, I think it's really important, and consistency is vital.
Coming to you, Craig.
I guess for me, I smile when I heard the question, because I wouldn't use the word youth workers, but I'll talk about people in the community that were of significance. So when you said that, straight away I thought of Miss Brumont, Miss Gaynor from primary school. Then I thought about Beanie Brown, 104 Saturday school. I was definitely one of the kids that had to go there every single Saturday.
School. People don't know about Saturday.
I think about Hockley Port. I think about Marcus Garvey Centre. I think about Handsworth Leisure Centre. I think about Cash the Flash, kickboxing, my Uncle Hector, Mr. Handsworth, you know, and then I think about, as I started to get older, the individuals that kind of came into my life that are around me in my community that opened the doors for me to do certain things. Safwell, Nathan, Raymond Douglas, Dr. Martin Glynn, Dr. Carlton Howson. And what's significant about all of these individuals is that they all opened the door.
Right.
And they enabled me to be my unique self.
Right.
So when I think about youth work and talking about, I like what Claire said about what she didn't have. For me, it's about keeping that same consistency about what I did have.
Yeah.
But then I can't say this without talking about my grandparents. I can't talk about my parents. And I had very functional family. And I think sometimes we have these conversations and think about people that are external, but we forget about the people that are actually inside us. So when I talk about empathy, compassion, and some of the foundations on what I'm built upon, I learnt that from home.
Yeah.
And I learnt that at Saturday school. I learnt that. So when I see injustice and I see young people that are struggling with their identity. I was a child that grew up that knew who I was and I knew it. So a lot of my friends that probably didn't have that, on reflection now, it's because maybe they didn't have those consistent people within the community. So I wouldn't use the word youth worker because they were just members of the community that witnessed and observed there was an injustice going on and we needed to work with these types of young people. Sorry, I also forgot Herman Wilson, had to big him up as well. And I think, you know, it just, for me, it was names that just kind of came up for me.
Yeah.
And
I saw you smiling.
You know, we have to give people their flowers, man, and pay homage.
Definitely.
So I actually hope that my primary school teachers are listening to this, like, yo, he remembers me. It's big boy that was once, you know, little running up and down Hockley, causing mayhem with his friends. But he turned out to be a good kid.
Phenomenal, more than a good kid, and a great role model. And I think what you've just touched on there is what a few others have said the same thing. It wasn't necessarily a youth, like I never grew up. I never had a youth worker or anybody that you would kind of like categorize as a youth worker like that. But like you say, I came from a very stable family. So I had people that were achieving and doing well. And that's the kind of only thing I knew was to do that. Like to do anything else didn't make no sense because no one's acting bad. Or the one or two cousins that were acting bad, I saw how that ended up for them. You know what I mean? I didn't really want to follow that path. So it is about having those consistent, real, relatable role models that are in the lives of our young people. But I still put a caveat around it. I do think there's an element of qualification. And we'll get to that because we're talking about safeguarding and we're talking about our community. And I know that in our community, we have got great people, great community mentors that speak into the lives of our young people. But on the flip side of that, we've got people that may not have been great and may not have done good things with our young people. So without going there yet, we're going to just look a little bit at the serious youth violence and the youth violence that we're seeing playing out and the absence of some of those people, those key individuals that are not around, like you say, that consistent individual. From your perspective, and your perspectives may be all similar or very different, why is serious youth violence on the increase? Oh my gosh.
I think it's a loaded question because I think sometimes when the question is asked, it's asked from a perspective where we are rooting for and trying to make sense with one answer.
Yeah.
And what I will say in my opening statement is it's complex, it's nuanced, and it's multifaceted.
Absolutely.
So when we talk about serious youth violence, from my world, it's like, what exactly you're talking about? Are we talking about gun and knife crime? Are we talking about violence towards particular young people? Are we talking about gender? Are we talking about young people that are substance misusers that end up involved in violent behaviors? Are we talking about terrorism? Are we talking about radicalization?
Right.
What are we talking about? So the reason why I set that as a pretext is because the word serious youth violence is highly racialized and it's highly gendered. So I don't want to fall into the trap of talking about serious youth violence from the lens of talking about predominantly young men
Young
without
black
talking
men.
about some of the other issues that are ultimately out there. Because part of my research and the things that I look at is, where do the guns come from? Guns are not produced in this country.
Exactly.
Heroin, cocaine are not produced in this country. So when we look at our data and statistics, we can look at these conversations from a very small lens. But when you look at things nationally, it doesn't reflect what we're seeing in newspapers.
Right.
So whilst, yes, there are issues that take place within the community when we talk about serious youth violence, but I also say, but what are you talking about? And a perfect example of that would be knife crime. So we use the word knife crime, which again is gendered, highly racialized. But are we talking about the fights that happen outside of bars and pubs? Are we talking about individuals that use weapons in their households where they're violent towards their partner? Are we talking about hooligans that decide that they want to fight after clubs? Or are we only talking about young people that carry knives because they may be involved in postcode conflict or they got beef with each other based on some sort of interpersonal violence? So I always struggle with that question. Because it's multifaceted and it's nuanced.
Right. Love it. Yeah. That's not the answer.
I think from my perspective, I think what's important for me to kind of say here is that, you know, we don't always see what's happening via the media. So the media may only talk about an incident that's happened if there's certain things that are connected to it. So death, if there's certain context to the way that the person's died. So me, in my role, like, we get reports on where a knife's been used, where a gun's been used each day. So we will see that. And then sometimes, if my day is really busy, you're looking at names and you're looking at scenarios, and they're just passing you by because you just see so many. And so, that's kind of coming from a work perspective there. When I then talk to providers or community interest companies or those working on the grassroots, they're working with and they're supporting and they're seeing the trauma of that each and every day. So if you would ask me from a professional standpoint why it's happening, my response is definitely going to be different to if you're asking Matt Stone from Handsworth, And it is hard because you're right, there isn't just one response, there is just one answer. But I think what is clear is that more needs to be done. More needs to be done. What that more is, I believe that there's certain facets of our community who are working on those things. Whether it's creating more opportunities, whether it's going out on the streets, whether it's, trying to actually get to the core root of why violence happens. So that's a lot of the work that we do in terms of the public health approach to violence, is looking at the root causes of why it happens. But again, that's not something that we can do with the resources that we have. That's a deep-rooted thing that actually those in position of power and influence have to support us with. Because it's too big.
It's bigger than us.
It's too big. It's too big, but also I think if there are certain areas that we can focus and target, whether it's things like poverty, opportunities, whether it's looking at things like trauma, let's start looking at how young people are growing up and the ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences, and how that affects your life course, then we can probably look at prevention more, and maybe understand the science behind that. So I'm here as much as those that listening are here to actually just kind of be in this space of, we don't necessarily know what the answers are, but let's talk and communicate. Let's do the research, let's do the theory, and let's do the action as well.
Yeah. Love it. Claire?
Yeah, I just think, first of all, what do we mean by serious? And violence? What are we defining that as? And I think there's something about it being very layered and very complex. And there is a big systems problem. And actually, I just think at the moment, we're just putting sticky plasters over opening wounds. And we can't get to the deep-rooted wound because the system stops that. And we can't stop poverty, deprivation, young people, children growing up in abusive homes where there's violence, where there's sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, substance misusing parents. Those are the drivers. If you see violence in your home, what is the likelihood and the probability of you going out and exhibiting that behavior or allowing somebody to be violent towards you? So it's multifaceted. It's the layers of trauma that children experience inside the home, what they see in their community. A lot of children tell us that, they've seen their best friend be murdered or stabbed or chopped up with a machete. Well, that's trauma. You're running from trauma at home where it's supposed to be safe. You're out in your community, you're seeing more trauma. So there's many reasons why violence takes place, and I just think at the moment I feel a bit hopeless. That's my honest opinion. At times I feel like there's not much that we can do. And so when Matt talks about, the little bits and Craig talks about the little bits that we do, I just feel like we might save one,
A few.
but a whole nother generation has gone. 'Cause when we lose one, we lose a generation.
That's right.
And it just feels very critical at the moment. I have never seen so much violence and it's the type of violence. It's
Right.
not even the violence and the act of it. It's the intensity and the horribleness of it. It's
Brutal.
yeah, that's the word.
barbaric.
Yeah, these are the words. I've never seen things happen like this before. And I know we're in a different generation. When I think about my children, you know, my son's 31, 32 now, my oldest, playing Lego.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think about my middle son, 22, Lion King.
Yeah.
These ages.
Yeah.
I think about my 19-year-old, just turned 19, and he's telling me how he's watching his friends run from mountains with machete. We're in a different lifestyle here, and I don't know what's happened over the years. Yes, poverty, deprivation, poor housing, newly arrived families, cultural differences, the way people have experienced certain things from different countries that they've come from attributes to their trauma. There's lots of things. I just don't know how we address
And
those
And I
things.
think when you, to your earlier point about it being laid and dissected, I think that enables us to arrive at some solutions.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about the layers, there's also things that have happened politically.
Yeah.
And there's also things that have happened economically that has had an impact.
Facts.
You know, we're talking about our current government, conservative government. If we went back 15 years ago, when youth work, as considering your
Yeah.
first question, when youth work was thriving, there was loads of initiatives, there was loads of finance, there was loads of real resourcing around engaging with some of these agendas. And this is not saying that it was way better, but it was definitely different.
Yeah.
It's because you had professionals that were resourced and given tools. I was a youth worker at that particular time, and our youth centre was thriving, and we had resourcing to work with children and young people. And then we went into a recession where we started to hear about cuts. So I had to leave my youth centre. Other workers had to leave theirs because their buildings were being shut.
Yeah.
And then we were all put into these nice fancy hubs. And these fancy hubs was the assumption that all young people were going to go. But what they didn't talk about was young people having to navigate through different area codes and postcodes, which then I think exacerbated a lot of the issues within particular communities.
Right.
Then we went through a particular period where we all were saying and predicting that we're going to start seeing an increase in things, but we didn't have the buzzwords at
Yeah,
the
we
time.
didn't have
So
the
we said, if you
buzzwords.
cut the police, you cut youth centres,
Right.
you slash youth workers, JNC qualified youth workers, if you throw them in the bin, these are the things that's going to start to happen. So then we had a period of, you may remember, there was an increase in knife crime for a
Right.
period of time. And then a whole other series of things that happened. You may remember there was a particular strategy that was created by under Theresa May, the Ending Gangs and Youth Violence Strategy, which birthed a lot of the stuff around multi-agency gang units and housing associations that got funding. And we started to see loads of people being moved out of area, but no problems were being dealt with. So then when we talk about the most recent times now, let's just say COVID in particular, we haven't really dealt with COVID.
No, we haven't.
The research that talks about COVID talks about the increase of mental health, substance misuse, more kids getting involved in campaigns and exploitation, more children in alternative provisions, more children in residential care and child support. Now we hit another recession. So the point is that from a political perspective
compounded.
and a society perspective, we haven't actually dealt with the
Anything.
ripple effects of all of those things. So now we have to talk about things like social media, artificial
Oh,
intelligence,
gosh. That's my next
games,
question.
films.
Let's not
So when
even.
you actually start to then layer all of those different things, and then you ask the question, what's causing youth violence or why is it on the rise? It's very easy to blame the young people and the children that are recipients from all of these societal changes. But it's about, well, where do we sit within this conversation? I think that's the conversation that I think becomes important.
That's so true. And it's interesting how people will very easily forget the different years, the many, 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 many years of, let's say, nothing, because it has been nothing. And then wonder why we're not able to do magic, conjure up massive change with young people. You can't do something with nothing. And many, many years with nothing.
It's a massive frustration, and I feel it for you, Max and you, Claire's, because, I'm in a different position now. I'm researching it. I'm looking at it from a different angle. And when I hear Claire say and Matt say, you know what, the feeling of hopelessness, I get it, because the numbers are crazy.
Yeah.
But the reality is, from a economic perspective, we're dealing with billions of pounds worth of problems with only a few 100,000 worth of funding.
99p.
And as I mentioned, words like mental health is expensive.
It is
You know,
very.
dealing with well-being is expensive.
It is.
And if there's no conversation from the political parties that are talking about a mass investment into mental health of our children and young people, I think that then becomes part of the next question about the standard, because with no disrespect as a qualified youth worker, you know, what I see happens in schools and within the wider community, children need therapy, children need counselling, and sometimes a mentor is not equipped to engage with a child or young person that's dealing with those adverse childhood experiences. Yes, we can guide. Yes, we can be trauma informed in terms of our practice, but as a qualified youth worker, and the way in which we train, there's specific skill set and attributes that a counsellor would need or a therapist would need, has similarities and overlaps, but it's very different. And I think it's important, because for some of us that even utilise therapy, as I said, it's expensive. So if you're thinking about 1 or 2 children that we can help, the plasters, as you just mentioned, what happens when you've got a whole school year?
Well,
what about when you've got a whole school?
A whole school.
And then you've got to talk about the children that are not in education, or mainstream education, and the ones that are in alternative provision, and the ones that are in child secure, and the ones that are in residential care homes.
And it's interesting because we had Purple Jackets, so the mentors and chaperones on Monday, and they were saying the same thing actually. You know, there's such an expectation. It's almost like we talk about the standard of youth work. The standard is that you're expecting youth workers to solve a million problems with a young person whilst not giving them the respect that they're owed, and not, you know, not really looking, especially in schools, it's sort of like, well, what are you doing here? Especially if you're getting results with a young person, it's, well, how have you done that then? But at the same time, it's recognizing that we were talking about mentoring specifically, and teachers and sometimes leaders thinking that mentoring is going to solve the issue. And actually, as mentors have took several steps back and said, this child needs a long course of therapy. You know, they've gone through incredible trauma, they've lost family members, they've lost friends, they've traveled, they've moved around, you know, and they might be acting in a particular way that you don't think is appropriate in the classroom, but it's not because they need a mentor, it's because they need to talk through some of the things that they've seen and experienced. So I think it's very interesting that we've all kind of come to the same conclusion, that we are sticking plasters on massive deep wounds. And there was a question I had that was, whose fault is it? Because, you know, a lot of times we're hearing, it's these kids, it's this generation. It's this generation, they can't behave themselves. These kids, they don't listen. But whose fault is it?
Everyone has a responsibility, and everyone should be held accountable.
I wouldn't say it's an individual fault. I'd say, you know, it's a collective responsibility and accountability for everything that's happening to our generation of children today. It's not an individual's fault or an organisation's fault or a service's fault. It's a collective responsibility and accountability on all of us.
I also think back to when I was in South Africa, I think last year.
Yeah, it was last year.
Last year, man. You know what I was talking about. And I remember being on the beach for the first day, and I saw three young black boys rolling on the beach, like happy and smiling, and I was like, I was moved, you know. I was moved because that was last December, after everything was kicking off. And myself, the Black Jackets had me speaking a lot, myself and Claire, myself and Craig. And I just was there thinking, I was just taken, like my mind went from all that stuff that was happening in Birmingham, West Midlands, flying miles away to the motherland, and just being like, okay, so how do we get from these 3 young boys running around happy, playing, to the scenario that we had in Birmingham where children are being killed? I just thought, like, there's so many factors. So many factors. But I was just there thinking, like, children need to just be children. They need to just grow up, have some fun. They shouldn't have to be thinking about what street they're gonna walk down, or it's just that question. Hard.
And it's difficult because I'm gonna go back to Claire's point. It's so hard to dissect, and I think as many of us that have that lived experience and many of us that have worked within the field, I talk about in my work a lot around positionality. And what that means is, you know, where do you sit within the conversation? And I think that's why I sit here now. Because my curiosity hopefully would enable people to have better understandings of the issues. And I think maybe I rub people up the wrong way when I talk about the standard so much, because I miss it. I miss workers that really understood what they were doing.
Yeah.
Workers that were really committed in developing themselves to be able to help families, communities, children and young people. And I think what my biggest frustration is a lot of people now are coming in just based on passion. And I talk about this a lot to Matt within this work. And you heard me earlier on say that when those political shifts had happened between 2009 and 2012, those of us that were working within community, generally, if you wanted to work young people at a strategic and a high level, you had to be qualified.
Yeah.
And I felt what had happened was it birthed, and as I said, it does rub people up the wrong way, but if the people hear me, they'll understand where I'm coming from. I think this was the birth of charities and CICs, where those individuals from the inner city community that had lived experience, that had grassroots knowledge, that could reach those families and those children and young people that the state was saying that they can't reach.
Yeah.
And I think what had happened was a lot of funding, commissioners started to fund a lot of these individuals because they had the reach. But it was a key thing that they forgot, evidence-based practice.
Yeah.
And whilst those JNC qualified youth workers and those trained youth workers that understood evidence-based practice, data collection, that understood professional conduct, that understood interpersonal communication skills, emotional intelligence, helping children and young people navigate through their trauma and so on and so forth. Whilst there was a massive decline in terms of the need for those types of workers, it resurrected loads of people with lived experience, which is brilliant and it has a place.
However,
so when we fast forward now, and then now the commissioners and those that are in positions of power and influence are saying, wait there, we only seem to be helping one or two young people, and I don't think the models that you're using is having some significant impact. And then what's happening is that a lot of those organizations and individuals are not able or equipped to provide that information to those that can give them more resources and more funding. And then what that does is it opens the door then for the bigger organizations that do and understand public health, understand the data collection. They can write a then nice bid and then they get the money. Then what happens then is the communities that are actually on the ground, because they don't understand how to create the data in order to present that to those that have the money and the people in positions of power and influence, they then look like gatekeepers. And then it creates a very weird, what is called a crabs in barrel scenario. And those communities that are left fighting over 10, 30, 40, 50K worth of funding, whereas we all just said in the beginning, it's £1 billion worth of problems. So for me, my work is really about how do we bring the standard back. So when I hear the word youth work, those that are youth workers will be like, the statement is we need to bring youth work back. What does that mean? What that means is we need to bring a standard back. And Matt asked me this question, I think it was last year, I think it was either before or after South Africa. And it's like, so what then is the solution around the standard? I am not saying that everybody needs to go back to university, but what I think that we need to do as organizations, both for those that fund people and for those that are interviewing people, are ensuring that people are very clear about what is the type of standard that we want. Because I always say that we are in a position where we can build children up or we can destroy them.
Absolutely.
And I don't want my 14-year-old son being around someone that's just passionate about what they do, but they're not sure what they're doing, because you would never do that if you needed help in a hospital.
Absolutely.
You would never do that if you went into a building and you needed therapy. You know, anybody on the corner can say, oh yeah, I can chat to you for 15 minutes, but that 15 minutes may destroy you if they say the wrong thing and they don't know what they're talking about.
Absolutely. I absolutely love that. And it has a serious place in my heart, because I think when we're talking about youth work, community work, engagement, outreach, all of those things, it takes skill, it takes qualification, it takes passion's important, but you have to come from a certain set of values, and you have to know what it is you're there to do and what outcome it is you're trying to reach. One of my bees in bonnets, and it's not about me, it's about you guys, but one of mine is that organizations do complain that they can't get the funding, and there's a running joke, we know that, you know, certain organizations take all the funding and some can't ever get in. But it's about positioning yourself, and for some that is about going back to college or uni and learning how to do that. It's about working with organizations who have got the skill set, who can show you how to do your monitoring, your evaluation, your data collection. It's about actually doing data collection, you know, and not just saying I chat to you for 15 minutes on the street, but you don't know who you spoke to, you don't know where they're from, you don't know their background. What have you got to bring to the table other than passion? Because I do think passion, but after a while that burns out.
100%.
So we've been there, we've talked. If there was one thing you could do to change the situation, what would it be? One thing.
Billions and billions of pounds in the hands of your Claires and your Matts. Short and succinct.
No pressure. No pressure. So short and sweet. Love it. Short and sweet.
I'm gonna say like a total shift in mindset or total shift in mentality of not even just young people, everyone. To be more encouraging of each other, supportive. As well as addressing your own self and what's going on within. I think if you can address some of those things that are going on within, a lot of these issues wouldn't be happening.
I just think we're all part of a big jigsaw puzzle, and each one of us plays our part. And it's about how we all fit together and connect. And so what I would want to see is the joining up of everybody who has the passion, the compassion, the responsibility, the accountability for a generation of our children and creating legacy. That we're all joined together and that we work together positively, that we're connected, that we've got the same vision, the same passion to be able to fight this, because I know we can't do this individually and we can't do it if we're fighting each other. And if we've all got the same values, the same visions, we want to see our children live, succeed, to create a next generation, to create a next legacy. We just need to put that jigsaw puzzle together and all fit together and work together better. And that's kind of what I would want to see, in addition to everything that these two have said.
More money, more Craigs.
There's a strategy.
More Matts.
There's a strategy.
More Claires. Phenomenal. Thank you so much. My last question, which isn't a question really, I've given you an idea of what it would be before. But when we're talking about confessions of a youth worker or a practitioner, what is the bee in your bonnet? What is the challenge, or what is that piece of inspiration? What is your confession? I'm coming to Craig because I know Craig's ready to confess.
I don't think it's definitely a confession, but it's definitely a bee in my bonnet. But it comes from a place of love. So I watch and observe quite a lot now. I feel like I'm a bit of an owl on the wall, especially from a West Midlands perspective. And I see a lot of my old school youth workers, my mentors, my close friends that I now call family. I don't understand why they're still doing youth work in the community. I don't know why they're still walking on the streets working with young people. Because I know that the knowledge and the skill set and the love that they have for young people, what they should be doing is making sure that they cascade that message to individuals that are all of the things that Claire just mentioned, with the compassion, the empathy, the knowledge, the willingness to want to learn, and we let them do what they need to do. So my bee in my bonnet is more a question. What is it going to take for them to leave the stage so they can join people like me that sit like an owl on the wall, that then we can say to the Matts and the Claires, I don't think that move is right because the research says it don't work, or why are you spending the money there? Because you'd save it more doing that. And I'm happy to be in that space, but I know that I can't be alone in doing that. So that's my biggest issue for those individuals. So for those that are sitting here and listening and also watching, observing, what is it going to take for you to leave the stage?
Whew. Smoke. Fire. Thank you.
I've got two, but I'm going to be very quick. So my first one is that everyone would value the third sector much more. Like on every layer, because they offer so much more than anyone can even understand. If for those who want to know more, like, please reach out to me and I can break that down. That's my first one. My second one is that a beam on bonnet is that people aren't considerate, and what I mean by considerate is they don't consider the context of things. So when they hear something going on, I see some social media, a young person has died, and it's like, here we go again. Oh, it's It's like, no. This is a child that's been killed. No matter what the circumstance, their life is gone. Yeah. So let's consider what that means. Let's consider our own space, our own life, hearing that and seeing that, and consider our response to that.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt.
Being the bunny.
Go for it.
Confession.
Or your confession.
I got too many confessions.
I
I need to go church. I wish that people would respect the community more. And I wish that they would accept community interest companies, grassroots companies, and give them the respect that they deserve, that they are professionals and specialists within their own rights, as well as parent and carers. And I wish that the wider system, the statutory in particular, would recognise the importance of community. Yeah. That if we're looking at a whole systems approach to tackling serious youth violence, whatever language we want to give it, I don't like that term either, Craig. I prefer actually how you've described it. Children attacking children, killing children. That's basically what's happening. The community knows a lot.
Yeah, man.
Right. Sometimes the community knows about something before the police even know.
Right.
Yeah. But you haven't built no relationships with the community that's trusting. Don't respect the community.
True.
So until we get to a position whereby that can happen and is happening, we are always going to be in this circular situation because there's no trust. I wish that statutory services would respect and treat the community as specialists in their own knowledge and worth. Yeah. Because in doing so, we could tackle this a lot more efficiently.
That deserves a round of applause. And before we get to the end, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Craig. This has been like everything for me. I really did want to hear the nuts and the bolts, but also the evidence. I wanted to hear the facts. I wanted not just to be a moan and a rant, because we do that very well, but actually we've presented some solutions here. We've given some food for thought for practitioners, for families, for young people to think about when they're navigating through life. So I really appreciate each and every one of you taking your time so much. This has been Confessions of a Youth Worker, episode 4. We have been lifting the lid on what it is to be involved in serious youth violence this afternoon, and looking forward to the next episode. I absolutely loved what Craig said about there being a standard for youth workers and practitioners who support young people in any capacity. When you think about it, you do have a standard for TAs, you have a standard for nursery educators, and you do have youth and community engagement or youth and community degrees. But what does that translate to when somebody might set up their own organisation, or when they become very passionate about helping young people? I think it's very obvious that passion alone isn't going to be enough to sustain the work that needs to be done. But actually we do need a number of different things. That does include real relatable role models, that does include qualifications and skills, but it also ties in the therapeutic interventions that need to take place for those youth workers as well. And I believe that should be a standard. I believe that when we look at all the work that we've done, when we look at all the podcasts that we've recorded, there's one thing that is very clear to me: that trauma and your closeness or your proximity to trauma should be limited. That there should be a cut-off point when you are exposed and how many exposures you have, because I think it begins to impact upon the standard of the youth work that we deliver.